Bastian. Chapter 111, The Night Comes. Middle. Odette looked down at the table with a heavy heart. There was a meager pile of banknotes, coins and other precious belongings. The pile certainly looked sorry for itself, and Odette looked about the room, desperate to find anything else that could be considered valuable. She had given most of her savings from the last 2 years to Tira, in a bid to get her out of the city and to safety, which hadn't left much for herself in her escape plan. She turned the study over, searching every little nook, and came up with a fountain pen with her initials on it and a silver inkwell box. Once Tira left and was finally safe, Odette planned on making her escape too. With determination, Odette repacked her savings pot. It was sufficient enough right now to hide out somewhere just beyond the border. There was no way she could stay, knowing Bastian's intentions to have her father his child. He showed absolutely no regard for her. In his relentless advances, he had become blinded in his endeavor to sire a child. She sobbed every time, before losing consciousness, only to come back to reality with his weight pressing down on her. It went on for days, his animalistic mating. Odette scrubbed the thought from her mind as she placed the savings box in its hiding place, in a secret compartment at the bottom of a locked drawer. She kept the key and the poetry book on the shelf. With her anxious heart calmed, Odette went to the window, where the evening moonlight splashed across the driveway. The urge to escape there and then rose in her as strong as ever. She had to restrain herself. Bastian was too aware of her actions, and she didn't want to spoil her plans with recklessness. For now, the estate was the safest place. Odette opened the window, allowing the fragrant scent of blooming heath flowers, suggested by Count Sanders, to waft in. "If you ever need help, feel free to ask," Count Sanders had told her, but that hope was fleeting and had melted away into the night. How could she ask him for help, to escape a husband that demands a child from her for betraying him, and all to protect her sister who had crippled their father? There was no one else she could ask for help. She was utterly alone. The truth prickled like thorns in her chest. A dog's deep barking broke Odette out of her thoughts. Marguerite had been napping by the fireplace, when she got up and approached Odette with her tail wagging. Odette hugged Marguerite. "It's okay, Meg." She gave Meg a kiss on the top of her head. Enjoying the small comfort Marguerite provided, Odette looked back out at the evening landscape, shrouded in fading twilight which reduced what she could see to barely past the window, and she saw the twinkle of a car coming down the driveway. The night was coming. Odette realized all too quickly, as the car came down the drive, stopping at the front entrance where she could not see. She didn't need to see to know who it was. Feeling shaky, Odette let go of Marguerite and closed the windows. It was going to be a long night. Middle. "Muller's letter has arrived, sir." It came with the evening post. The butler's voice, giving a report, was heard between their rough breaths and moans that were growing faster and faster. Bastian paused in his thrusting and looked at the bedroom door. It must be important for Lovis not to wait for a more appropriate time. Odette stopped writing on the bed as he pulled out and stood up straight. "Understood," Bastian said to the bedroom door. Bastian looked down at Odette, whimpering on the bed. It was no secret to all servants that he loved to spend as much time with his wife as he could. It served to quell the rumors of discord in their marriage. Above all, Bastian enjoyed the fact that Odette found such rumors humiliating. Bastian's gaze shifted downwards, observing Odette's trembling body as she was gasping for breath. "Put the letter in my room, I will be there shortly." He grabbed Odette's waist firmly, climbed on top and planted himself back inside her. This could not be called lovemaking. There was no love in it, more like going through the necessary motions to get what he wants. His breaths quickened, yet his face remained calm as he gazed at Odette's pale back swaying beneath him. As tears streamed down her face, his passion surged, and with a groan he squeezed Odette's waist as he felt the climax, and her gasping in pain was icing on the cake. The smell of sex in the room was more like the stench of self-loathing and disgust. Took another round. In the dressing table mirror, Bastian caught sight of their intimate encounter, making him to close his eyes, battling his uncontrollable passion. When he opened them, he met Odette's tear-filled turquoise gaze through the mirror. She looked right back at him, her eyes were vacant and her expression placid like still of water. Bastian's eyes flickered briefly, and then he gazed into the darkness before refocusing on the bed. He didn't let Odette rest, swiftly resuming his passionate thrusts, an ecstasy that bordered on pain. He might have enjoyed it a little too much, but seeing Odette's tears soak the bedsheet only served to make him finish in her quicker. She let out a cry of pain, and with the last pulse of orgasm, he let her drop to the bed, her hips marred with fresh bruises. The mixture of satisfaction and pity swirled within him as he felt the desperation emanating from her trembling form. Bastian took a moment to catch his breath. He looked cold and callous, stark contrast to the passion he had shown before. He wanted to go again. The timid little woman on the bed, too weak to prevent her fate, made him more excited as he looked at her trembling body, but he had business to attend to. As Odette lay unconscious, struggling to breathe and unable to muster the strength to move a finger, Bastian turned away and left the bed behind. After emptied the glass filled with water on the vanity table, he put on his dress and checked himself over in the mirror. There was no trace of the madman that had driven Odette to despair, and he smiled at himself. Bastian walked to his own room without ever looking back. From the partially open door, Odette heard the butler's patient voice, and Bastian replied briefly. Although she couldn't catch their conversation, it seemed that Mahler's emissary was awaiting a response from Bastian. As he prioritized the company's work above all else, their night might end here. With a glimmer of hope, Odette summoned the strength to lift her weary body. As the butler departed, a silence enveloped the room. Bastian appeared fully focused on his work. In that moment, Odette entered the bathroom and stepped into the shower. The sound of rushing water echoed through the silent darkness. Middle. It was late by the time Bastian returned. The bed was empty. Bastian did not worry as he closed the door. Odette was always so predictable. He walked across the room, taking a seat by the fireplace to light a cigarette. He could hear the harsh sounds of running water, the shower. As he smoked, he looked at the documents Mahler had sent him. The railway concession linking Filia and Belov was supposed to be contracted to a family with ties to both royal families, but there was a problem and everyone was being dragged into a bidding war, even his father's company. Bastian saw this as an opportunity to rectify a 2-year-old mistake, and the board agreed. His father was aiming to use the Count Ellis connection to become a father-in-law, and if he succeeded, everything would fall into place like dominoes. Bastian threw the proposal into the fireplace, and despite his cigarette burning down to the nub, Odette still had not come out of the shower. He pulled out another cigarette and headed over to the bathroom door. There was no other noise but the sound of the shower. Bastian pushed open the door and was not expecting to be greeted by utter darkness, so he reached in and turned on the light, bathing the bathroom in a warm glow. He smiled as he saw Odette curled up in the bathtub, hugging her knees and her skin a sickly pale blue pallor. How long had she been sitting under the freezing cold water? Odette did not look up until Bastian turned off the water. Then, their eyes met, each carrying a different temperature. Bastian. Chapter 112, Seeds of Unhappiness. Middle. Enjoying the sensation of misery, I see, Bastian said, with the cigarette still clamped in his lips. Odette stared at him with bloodshot eyes. They had mingled like rotting animals most nights, but this was the first time they had properly looked at each other. Each night Odette had to listen to his insults and ridicule, making her feel pathetic and small. If you want to freeze to death, I suggest you try a little harder, take the extra steps. Bastian gestured out the window. There's a whole sea of frigid water out there that would welcome you. Odette glared at him as her teeth clenched to stop them shivering. I'm not going to give up my life for someone like you. Now, if you have nothing more to say, please leave. Save your foolish breath, Bastian said, tilting his head slightly. He still wore a smile, but his eyes were cold and intense. Odette trembled and averted her gaze. Enduring this torture was what made her a fool, but it was better than letting the seeds of misery sprout. She only had to endure it long enough for Tira to get married and flee across the border. Just go, Odette said weakly. She didn't want to engage in unnecessary arguments with that man in her current state. Watching Odette for a moment longer, Bastian finally turned and discarded his cigarette into the sink and washed his hands, then approached the bathtub to turn on the hot water. He then went over the fireplace and built up a roaring fire in seconds. Odette was still huddled beneath the shower, trembling, watching it all, not saying a word. She was even more shocked when Bastian tossed all his clothes onto the floor and returned to her side, wrapping her body with a warm towel. He strode across the bathroom, carrying her to the bathtub that has been filled with hot water. Odette screamed as the sound of the splashing water disrupted the silence of the autumn night. She felt the warmth slowly seep into her, but made the chill in her bones more pronounced. She never realized she had let herself get so cold. Bastian hugged her tight, as she sat between his legs, and bound her. He tidied up her crazed mess of hair and checked her temperature by moving the back of his hand along her body. As his hand moved like a snake below the water and past her navel, Odette convulsed. "Stay still," Bastian said as a cold command. He wrapped his arms around Odette and started caressing her belly. "I hope you are not planning on leaving any time soon. It would be a terrible burden to run off and leave your child, but if you are adamant on walking such a path, I won't object." His deep voice tickled in her ear, and even now, his hands tickled across her belly like he was already feeling for a baby's movements. Odette endured it, keeping her eyes closed tight. She needed to remain humble, give him no reason or excuse. She had to wait for the right moment, when he would lower his guard, just like when she stole the documents that brought about this tragedy. "Aren't you afraid of me?" Odette asked. Bastian smiled like Odette had shared an amusing joke. He turned off the water, which was now lapping at Odette's chest. "I betrayed you," Odette continued. "You're dealing with something very important right now, confronting your father again." "So?" Bastian replied lazily, his hand firmly on her breast. The softness in the palm of his hand filled him with a pink haze. It was hard for him to resist the temptation of her flesh. "Well, keeping someone like me around, someone that had already betrayed you once." Odette finally let out an unbearable moan as Bastian started to roughly play with her nipple. "Do you not think that's kind of foolish?" She managed to finish what she was saying with a whimper. She prayed for Bastian to regain his once cold rationality, but all she got was a mocking sneer. "Why, have you received a new order or something?" Bastian pulled Odette into him. "You can go ahead and do as you please, I think it would be very entertaining." He lowered his head and started sucking her breast, and as he lingered, she clutched his shoulder to support her body. Every glance they shared stole her breath away. Could she really escape from this man? Consumed by despair, Odette trembled at the thought of Bastian's ruthlessness towards her if she betrayed him twice, chilling her blood. But she couldn't live like this anymore. She had to do something, even if it meant doing something insane. "Worry not, Lady Odette, I can be quite generous. I can even sleep with a dog I hate if it pleases me." As she stared up at the man who bore a flat smile, his large hand descended down her back and gripped her buttocks firmly. Unable to fight off his forceful entry, she withered and sagged into him. Embracing her, Bastian entered her without hesitation. His gown, discarded on the floor, was quickly drenched by the water spilling from the bathtub. He hoped she would get pregnant soon. Once her belly was round and the child born, his desire and hatred would be satisfied, allowing him to wash it all away. Then, he could throw everything, the memories of those foolish days and the remnants of corroded emotion. Having lost all self-restraint, Bastian held Odette and started moving wildly. Water splashed onto the floor, soaking the clothes and towel that had been discarded there. The woman that had been like ice, was now blazing hot. He laughed as he pumped, laughed so loud he felt like he might have gone mad. It didn't seem like a completely wrong decision. Middle. Sandrine lowered her glasses and delicately unfolded her fan, while the singer on stage's melancholic aria scratched at her nerves. It was a decidedly boring opera performance. "You don't seem to be in the mood, is anything the matter?" A whisper of a voice reached her, before she had the chance to consider getting up and leaving. Sandrine turned her head as she let out an exasperated sigh, and came face to face with a sweet smile, reminiscent of the young boy it once belonged to. As she looked at Noah, a hint of disappointment lingered in her smile. 21. No, it was 22. Noah Hoffman was a budding artist from the southern countryside. He was a decent enough lover, good looks, a pleasing physique and a friendly demeanor that knew how to handle people. He wasn't a great painter, not enough to be a real success, but his way of life was certainly worth using, but he was no match for Bastian. Ever since that man's rejection, she decided to accompany Noah out in public a lot more. It was an attempt to provoke Bastian, to get a reaction from him, though she had the faint inkling that even if he did know about her going out with Noah, the cold, heartless bastard wouldn't lift a finger. "Shall we go?" Noah said. Sandrine simply closed her fan with an ambiguous smile and shook her head. She didn't feel like socializing with this man tonight. "What of your recent works?" Sandrine said, trying to hide her anxiety. Noah got excited almost immediately at the thought of talking about his latest exhibition. It was full of the dreams of third-rate painters, or so Sandrine thought, and although it was unremarkable, it would certainly be better than this opera. Just as he was about to speak, he pointed quickly. "Oh, look, Franz Clauswitz is here." He pointed to a box diagonally opposite from them. Bastian's half-brother was there with his fiancée and both families. I thought he was taking after the family business? Sandrine asked. I don't know, but he is our patron. He provided the studio and helped with the exhibition. He doesn't do it himself, that I have heard of, probably because of the contention with the family business. Well, he is quite the delicate young master. Oh, by the way, I heard something very interesting about Franz, Noah said, lowering his voice as if they would hear him over the distance, and the singing. He always locked his studio doors when he works, but one day, he forgot to do so, so we snuck in to take a look and found several paintings of the same woman. It was Bastian's wife, every single one of them. Bastian's wife, are you sure? Sandrine's eyebrows shot up her forehead. Absolutely. I even checked against a picture in an old newspaper, it was definitely her. Maybe she was an attractive muse. Perhaps, but being that obsessed seems a bit strange, and no matter what, if people saw those paintings, it would cause quite the scandal. Sandrine locked him with a stare for a moment as she was lost in thought, then resolved with a soft smile. She finally felt like this evening was going to become a little more entertaining. Bastian. Chapter 113, The Final Way of Atonement. Middle. The carriage went through the city center of Rats at speed. Odette was looking out at the scenery, barely able to take in any of the details of Boulevard Privé passing by the window. Making her eyes go funny, she turned to look at Countess Trier in the opposite seat. Thank you, Countess, said Odette. The Countess waved a hand. It's nothing, dear, you don't need to show any gratitude. On her way back from visiting relatives in Ardennes, the Countess stopped by the house of Clauswitz. She had growing concern for Odette, who hadn't left the confines of the mansion's walls in weeks. She had intended to make a short stop, check up on the young lady, then be off again, but then Odette made quite the unexpected request. Is something the matter? The Countess asked. No, not at all, Odette said, it's just that it was so nice to see you after such a long time, so I thought it would be nice to do a little traveling together. A woman who was married to a rich husband, who collected cars like they were sweets, requesting a ride in a carriage. Odette had originally claimed that there was some important matter in Rats she needed to attend to. There were too many holes in her story, and despite that, Countess Trier pretended not to notice. She was worried about the thin and sickly-looking girl. The Countess made a disapproving noise. To hear such honeyed words from you. So, where is it you wish to go? If I'm giving you a ride, I might as well take you the whole way. Oh, no, it's quite all right, Countess, we're almost there. You can drop me off here if you wish. There was only a month left until Tira would be leaving, and Odette needed to raise more funds. She had gathered together some things that she was going to sell, but needed to do it discreetly, so as not to draw attention. She could not take one of Bastian's cars and a driver. That would have been too conspicuous, and no doubt the driver would report back to Bastian. Taking a public car was also too risky, too suspicious. She was feeling stuck, with no way forward, until the unsuspecting Countess came to visit. She was like a ray of golden sunshine on a rainy day. This was especially handy as Bastian would be tied up with work and wouldn't be able to get out to visit Ardennes for a good long while. The carriage finally came to a stop outside the Rheinfeld Hotel on Main Street. After bidding the Countess a fond and hasty farewell, Odette hoisted up her bag and made to leave. My dear Odette, if you ever need help with anything at all, come find me. I can't promise I can do everything for you, but I will certainly try my best. It's better than struggling alone, wouldn't you say? Odette could feel the warmth and kindness in the Countess' words. Yes, Countess, I will do that, thank you. Odette waited until the carriage was clear out of sight, then made for her true destination, the shady back alleys behind the city. A complex maze of narrow walkways teeming with gambling dens, shady establishments and illicit business. The pawn shop here was renowned for being discreet and putting a price on just about anything. Odette knew of it because of her father, who had sold her mother's heirlooms and even worn-out shoes to pay for debts. Using a veil to hide her face, Odette walked the all-too-familiar route, and once she reached the pawn shop, she couldn't help but look over her shoulder at the gambling den where her father had lost her to Bastian. Odette stared at the entrance to the gambling den for a long moment. The kindness Bastian had shown her father back then had quickly turned to poison for Odette. Well, her debt was more than paid off now, and she could not wait to leave him. She didn't feel a single pang of regret at that thought. It was the right thing to do, it had to be done. Taking a deep breath and letting all the emotion wash away from her, She pushed open the door to the pawn shop, clanging a bell as she went in. Middle colon middle middle colon middle. The document presented is a strategic report on the bidding for the railway concession connecting Filia and Belov. If we can acquire this section and merge it with the Berg Inland Railway, owned by Ellis, we can create a robust transportation network in the northern continent. Bastian made his brief report, his blue eyes locked on Duke Levere. With a hint of arrogance, he silenced the Duke's laughter. Every day, Sandrine's pleas to Bastian Clauswitz for clarity on divorce and remarriage intensified. He couldn't understand why such a woman would put so much effort into the grandson of a junk dealer. He chose to watch closely, eventually taking the initiative himself. Bastian, clear about his objectives, displayed nonchalance. He greeted him, seamlessly transitioning into business discussions. Despite his secretary's reports of his late nights at the company, he showed no weariness. His face, freshly washed, was the only hint of those long hours. His shirt, pristine and wrinkle-free, looked freshly donned. The Duke felt as if the junk dealer's grandson was toying with him. However, he chose to watch and wait. The hound seemed to have found another interesting prey, and considering the potential massive profits from this venture, he overlooked Bastian's discourteous behavior. The railroad business, which had started hand in hand with Ellis, was growing more and more prosperous each day. Levere had a knack for being able to quickly gain ground, but Ellis was the driving force behind the venture. Over the years, the power dynamic had shifted and Bastian could see it. That was likely why he risked leaving Sandrine in such uncertainty. "Before you sign, there's something I need to hear from you," Duke Levere said, shifting the focus as he reviewed the report. Bastian simply nodded. "Well, I'll get straight to the point. When do you plan on taking my daughter?" "As far as anyone can see, the deal should have been concluded. We have held up our end, so what exactly are you waiting for?" "That is business between me and the Emperor. All you need to know is that our deal has not yet been concluded." "But it's been 2 years, unless there are details I am not aware of." "Yes, that was the initial plan, but due to unforeseen circumstances," Bastian shrugged, "so I have to maintain the marriage for now." "How much longer do you expect it to take?" "I wish I knew. If it's too much bother for you, you can explore other options." "Other options, you say?" "Yes, other potential marriage partners that you might have considered before, just in case." After Sandrine's divorce became public information, propositions flooded in. Most were from reputable families and several suitable matches were noticed amongst the dross. The problem was Sandrine. For some reason she had her heart set on Bastian. "I thought you might have changed your mind because of the feelings you have for your wife. At least the public is in the opinion that you truly love your wife." "If that is true, then yes, I will seek other options." "I understand your perspective, Duke. Do you intend to cast Sandrine aside?" "Of course not. Lady Levere has always been my first choice once my dealings with the Emperor is concluded. It's just difficult for me to give you the definite answer you seek. If that leads you to searching other options, I would not blame you and humbly accept whatever decision you make." Duke Levere was convinced that Bastian was not the man to make his daughter happy. He could already imagine what her life would be like, living with this man, eternally craving his love, but never being properly satisfied and eventually withering away in loneliness. "If the engagement is broken, I will take full responsibility," Bastian said, unexpectedly. "If you go for the contingency plan, the collaboration will continue as it is. The same can be said if Levere rejects my proposal and wishes to withdraw from the partnership. I will respect whatever decision you make. So whether you marry my daughter or not, the deal stands?" "It does not define the deal," Bastian said with a smile. "If you find it difficult to decide, I can give you more time." Bastian tidied up the documents on the table and picked up the investment agreement while leaving the signature blank. It felt like Bastian was being considerate toward the other party, but upon closer inspection, he had maintained control. The benefits promised to Levere were just as much guaranteed for Ellis, but Bastian made the whole ordeal seem so alluring that the Duke could not risk not being a part of it. "What a Berg bastard," the Duke thought to himself as he finally took up the contract. Middle colon middle middle colon middle. "Welcome, master, the madam is in the solarium." Lovis greeted Bastian with a report on Odette's location. He did not bother to question why Bastian had not decided to stay in Rats all weekend. It was not his place to pry. Bastian barely made a noise unacknowledgeable as he walked past his butler. He had completed in 2 days what was supposed to have taken 3, and even for a young, healthy man, It was exhausting. "Would you like to rest in your room for the moment? I will inform the mistress of your return," Lovis said. "No need, leave her be. Then I will prepare dinner. I'm going to run for a while, let's talk dinner later." The butler bowed his head and backed away into the shadows as Bastian made his way upstairs. Bastian always found exercise good to refocus his mind, it was a long-standing habit. After changing, Bastian immediately left the mansion for the coastal walkway. He stopped abruptly just as he turned a corner of the mansion. Music was flowing from an open second-floor window. Slowly, Bastian raised his head in recognition. It was the family melody, and it was coming from the solarium, where Odette was reportedly to be. Bastian. Chapter 114, At the End of the Gaze. Middle. The last note escaped out into the solarium and Odette breathed a sigh of relief as she lifted her fingers off the keyboard. Though not as practiced as she once was, her hands were not as stiff as she thought they would be, but she wasn't sure it was enough to take up a job as a piano tutor. Standing in front of the piano, Odette began to recheck her belongings. Even if she was able to make her escape, it was going to be tough to set herself up in a job, especially if she did something wrong and got caught out. One wrong move could see her future go up in smoke. The money she got from the pawnshop was just not enough. Even the wedding dress and ring, which she was saving for last, could not meet the needed sum. A paperweight, a hairpin, and a knee blanket. Odette gathered more trinkets together to sell. During her scavenging, she managed to find the gold bracelet Dora had gifted her, inlaid with diamonds and rubies. Like all things owned by Bastian Clauswitz, it was made of top-quality gems. Her heart was shaken for a while to sell it, but she had already learned how miserable and terrible the price of the sin she had committed against that man was. She didn't want to add theft to her list of crimes. Odette gathered together everything she wanted to sell into the basket that used to be Marguerite's bed. It was when she was standing up from putting the bracelet in that she felt cramps in her stomach. She went to the window to get some air. Sitting herself on the sun-drenched sill, she closed her eyes and focused on the sensations of her body. As if it weren't an illusion, soon the unpleasant stabbing pain came again. "Thank God. I'm so glad." Odette sighed, calming her upset stomach. Her anxiety and restlessness grew as the day of her escape drew near. She knew that if it was anything else, the mere thought of the worst-case scenario stopped her breath. When her period a few days late from her monthly flow, she couldn't sleep properly. Having calmed her raging emotions, Odette carefully checked the pain in her chest. That was when she saw Bastian, far off along the coastal walkway. He wasn't supposed to have returned until tomorrow. Odette's eyes went wide and she got up off the window. Bastian was dressed in his sportswear, running along the coastal path connecting the mansion to the beach. There were times she could not go out to meet him because he came home earlier than planned, but Lovis would always come to tell her that the master of the house was home. It was strange that she had not heard anything on his return. He had been home long enough to get changed at the least. Lovis would never make such a mistake, so it had to have been under Bastian's orders. Perhaps his desires had an expiration date. Odette allowed the faintest glimmer of hope as she watched Bastian disappear beyond the coastal path. Odette leaned back on the windowsill and hugged herself. The pain she thought had gone returned in force. As she tried to coax the pain away with deep breaths, the sound of a bell came from afar. She looked to see that Bastian had come back around from the coastal path and was standing on the boundary between the coast and the garden. "It will start tomorrow, if not tonight." A voice in her head was telling her, and as if Bastian could hear her thoughts, he looked up and Odette was caught in his gaze. Their eyes met across the distance, holding the gaze until the sunset burned a deep red. Middle. Bastian climaxed and Odette felt like he was trying to crush her in his hands. As she gasped for breath, she slumped limply on the bed, exhausted. Weary, Bastian collapsed on the bed, the moonlight casting hazy shadows on the wall. Odette did not move and laid as if she was already dead. The nerves that had been on edge all day finally relaxed, now that business was taken care of. Bastian changed his mind about leaving the bed and watched Odette with a precise gaze, as if trying to read a map. He thought she looked unusually pale and her smooth body invoked images of a sculpture carved from ice. He could distinctly see red marks and bruising on her buttocks and between her legs, where he had been less than delicate with her during sex. Unconsciously, his eyes narrowed as he noticed teeth marks on her ankles and hamstrings, pausing briefly at a bruise on her thigh. She was a woman who was definitely easily bruised and he was not happy about the damage left on her skin. Odette. Calling her name was an impulsive choice. He did not stop in time and as usual, she replied with silence. A sharp scream shattered the silence. Bastian turned her over and could see her eyes sparkle in the dark. Lying face to face, Odette met his gaze without flinching. He couldn't see how bloodshot and tear-filled they were in the dark. His long fingers began to move through her hair, like caressing a pet. "Is everything going well?" He sounded like he was mocking her, his voice carrying through the darkness. Embarrassed, Odette held her breath. Was she being followed? Why? Bastian laughed. "Did you stop being my stepmother's dog?" I was ready to be terrified. Luckily, Bastian's doubts were directed elsewhere. "You need to earn more, don't you? After giving all your savings to your sister." Tears threatened to sting Odette's eyes with pain and sorrow, but she was strong enough to hold them back. One day, even this will be a distant memory, faded in the past, just like all the other memories of her failures and mistakes. Time flows on and nothing is eternal. That was the only thing keeping seeing each day. If there's something you want, just say. Who knows, you might just get it, if you play your cards right. Odette remained silent. "You will be the mother of my child after all. It won't do to have you fall into thievery or something." His words were silky smooth, as if paying her a sweet compliment, but were laced with malice and suspicion. Perhaps he didn't want an answer and was merely trying to bait her, which is why he never reacted to her silence. Odette patiently waited for the end of the night. Thankfully, he had no desire to hang around and torment her some more, and soon he would leave as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. Then she would wash, tidy the bed and finally get some sleep. It had been her routine for a week. "Bastian?" There was no response. He had fallen asleep, his soft, rhythmic breathing a giveaway. Odette let out a frustrated sigh and rolled over, turning her back to him. It was an effort, but she freed her hair from under him and pushed away his heavy arm. Bastian stirred and replanted his arm around her waist, pulling her in tight. Odette struggled a little more, but she was fully entwined within his arms and legs. She became contemplative for a moment and stopped resisting. "You seem to enjoy this little game with me," Bastian said sleepily. "Let me go, it's disgusting and I can't stand it," Odette growled. "Then stop resisting and give me a child." In cold fury, he pulled her in closer, encircling her with his arms. His solid, muscular body threatened to crush her, even when not trying. "It's the only way we are going to end this disgusting affair." She could feel his smirk in his words. Bastian's hand moved from her breast to her stomach. Odette shivered at his touch and squirmed violently. She tried with all her might to get free of him, but in the end, she couldn't manage to move an inch from him. "If you can manage it, I would like a daughter who looks just like you. So if she grows up and asks about you, I can tell her to look in a mirror to see her mother," Bastian said in a whisper, resting his chin on her forehead. His large hand, caressing her body, felt distinct with calluses, soft yet rough. Odette closed her eyes and fought back the urge to rage at him, to let out all her anger and frustration. This man was clearly going mad with each passing day. It was just a relief that Tira's wedding wasn't too far away. Bastian. Chapter 115, Clean Up. Middle. "Are you sure?" Theodora asked, with a clipped laugh. The news had been delivered by Molly, through her aunt, about Bastian's current habits. Since his return, she thought that Bastian would divorce Odette, but the reality seemed very different. Rumors were that he was spending every spare minute he had with his wife, and that since they had been married for a long time already, they were trying to have kids, start a family. Molly's words seemed to be more than just a rumor. "Madam," the maid said, doing her best to defend her niece. Theodora sighed and went to stand by the window, nodding as she went as if to suggest that she knew all too well. She could see Bastian's mansion from the window, across the water. It feels like Bastian wants to put the past behind him and simply focus on being with his wife, but she has other ideas. Molly said she was willing to rekindle our connection, but acts like she is going to run away with more than her fair share of everything. I'm sure she is not so dim-witted as to do something so stupid, especially after what happened last time she tried to betray Bastian. Theodora turned around and gestured. Nancy quickly came forward with a tray that had a cigarette and an ashtray on it. There has to be something else. Lost in thought for a moment, as she lit her cigarette, Theodora opened the window and blew smoke out into the cold air. Odette was no ordinary person. She was still young and naive enough to be easily manipulated, but she was still clever enough to hire a detective to gather evidence in order to save her own skin. If there was a chance to get closer to Bastian again, there was no way Odette would ally with her. Things had gone wrong from the start. It felt like Bastian was content and living happily ever after with a woman that had tried to stab him in the back. He must have gotten a brain injury during his time away. Should we try again with Molly, or do you think she has played her part? No, let Bastian's wife do what she wants for now, Theodora said, stubbing out the half-smoked cigarette and turning back to her desk. Deep sighs escaped her as she consulted the troubling letter again. Ella von Klein had sent the final ultimatum: set a wedding date by autumn or she would break off the engagement with Franz. Theodora didn't blame Ella. In fact, it was surprising that she had been patient up until now. Franz was the first person to break the agreement, getting married after a year's engagement. He was impatient to start a family, after finishing his successor training and becoming a fully established businessman. Fortunately, the Klein family had readily agreed and the problems arose soon after. Even though he had achieved his goals, Franz still kept coming up with excuses to postpone the wedding. His passion to his fiancée was tepid at best, and now rumors were circulating that he planned to call off the engagement for good. It was becoming unbearably humiliating for Ella von Klein. "Do you plan on using that woman as a spy again?" Nancy said cautiously. Theodora carefully folded up the letter and put it safely in a drawer. "Well, she has already been exposed to the situation for a long time. I doubt she would be of much use now." "Then get rid of her." There wasn't a hint of hesitation in Theodora's voice. Even though the fire had been cast at her feet, Franz seemed utterly clueless. He probably hoped the engagement would be called off at this point. Franz had been so happy to be Count Klein's son-in-law, at first anyway. His change of heart can be linked all the way back to when he first met Odette, and ever since, he had been trying to ruin his own life. At this point, it could be considered an obsession. "Get rid, like Sophia's?" The maid's voice trembled slightly. "Oh my God, Nancy," Theodora laughed. "I'm sorry, madam, I misspoke, forgive me." Theodora watched Nancy grovel with amusement. It had been so long since she had heard that name. She had given that same order back then too. It had been so many years ago. If she really is trying to escape, we should help her. After all, it was me who broke the promise first, so I should repay the debt. Theodora quickly scrawled something on a piece of paper, folded it up, sealed it with wax and addressed it to Odette. Bastian's intentions didn't matter, they couldn't afford any more delays. To protect Franz, they needed to get rid of Odette as soon as possible, and it was not a waste of money to help her along her way, so long as it looked like she left on her own 2 feet. "But madam, what if she has other tricks up her sleeve?" Nancy said, holding the note passed to her. Theodora smiled softly, as she cleared away the letter box. "Do you remember the name of the pharmacist? You mean the apothecary, Mr. Lev?" Nancy's eyes twinkled. Theodora's smile deepened as she thought about it. It had been such a long time since she had Lev by her side. They had known each other so well and spent so much time together. "Lev, yes, that's right. It was Lev. Nancy, your memory is impeccable. I guess Molly takes after her aunt quite well." Nancy understood the implication. Lev could handle poisons just as well as any medicine. Nancy nodded with a broad smile on her face and turned to leave. Middle. Odette paced around the room restlessly. Her complexion was as pale as a sheet of paper. It had been several days already and nothing had changed. She could definitely feel the familiar pain, but for some reason, there were no other symptoms. Occasionally, when she felt unwell, she would be delayed by a day or two, but her cycle had never been delayed this much. It was a bad portent. Once Tira's wedding was finished, and they were safely aboard the emigrant ship, Odette planned to leave right after her. She had memorized the trains heading for Philia, which ran from the port to the central station. She had to fight the desire to leave with Tira. She had to keep her sister at a distance, at least, until the madman had given up chasing her. Philia seemed like the most suitable destination for that. There was only 10 more days left. 10 more days of praying that things would not slip up. Just 10 more days to endure. "Madam, it's Dora, there's a call from Miss Spiller." At the very moment when her nerves felt like they were at breaking point, Dora came with unexpected news. Odette understood the importance of such a message and ran for the door, flinging it open to a stunned maid on the other side. "Ah, sorry Dora." Odette didn't pause to make sure the maid was not too startled and dashed down the corridor without looking back. By the time she reached the study a second later, she was out of breath. "Tira." Calling out the name down the receiver, with a tremble in her voice, Odette heard sobbing on the other end. "I'm sorry for my behavior, sister, I didn't mean what I said. I was just upset, I didn't want to accept that we had to part ways like this. I know, Tira, it's fine. Odette could feel tears burning her eyes. Will you come to my wedding? I don't blame you if you don't, but I still want to start anew, with your blessing. Yes, of course I will come to the wedding. You said the wedding will be held at Becker's house, right? Give me the exact address, and I'll go there. There was a muffled noise that sounded like someone was trying to strangle a drowning cat. The venue has changed though, did you know? No, what do you mean, why? Major Clauswitz sent a message to Nick. He said he would arrange the wedding to be at the fanciest hotel in Carlsbad. He is going to cover all the expenses and asked me to invite you to celebrate, but why would he keep it a secret from you? The words barely registered in Odette's mind. Her hand holding the receiver quivered and lost its grip and dropped the phone. Shaking started all over her body. Sister? What's wrong? Odette could hear Tira's soft voice coming to her from a distance, but her body did not respond. All she could do was collapse to the floor and try and suck in great gasps of air. Odette could see, perhaps this man's goal wasn't simply to get a child from her. He was prepared to kill her, drying up her blood. If so, his plan was proceeding smoothly. Middle. Have you returned, master? Said Bastian's maid as he turned a corner on the third floor. He replied with a nod. I am worried for the mistress. She has not eaten anything and I thought she might have lost her appetite, but it seems like she is simply refusing to eat. She has given orders not to set the table for several days now. Bastian let out a frustrated sigh and turned back around. The maid's face, which showed genuine concern, held no clues as to why Odette would resort to a hunger strike. It seems like there is something deeply bothering her and I thought that, well, if you could comfort her, master, it might help. Very well, prepare a meal. Now? It might be possible to prepare light refreshments, but... Fine, that will do, bring it to my wife's room. After leaving a calm order, Bastian walked towards Odette's room. He glanced down at his wristwatch, which showed 11 o'clock. It wasn't too late. Bastian. Chapter 116, Money. Middle. The dining table was set in the middle of the night for what looked like a casual tea party, but for one. Odette watched the absurd scene, leaning against a pillar. As the servant moved the table in front of the fireplace, the maid laid out the tablecloth and setting the food brought in on a serving trolley. Good job, Bastian said as Dora finished arranging the cutlery and stepped away from the table. After washing his hands, Bastian casually took his seat at the table, as if there was nothing amiss at all. He was still neatly dressed in his uniform, which contrasted against Odette's disheveled nightgown. Please sit, ma'am. Bastian motioned for Odette to take her seat. Reluctantly, Odette approached the seat across from Bastian, but did not sit. You don't need to do this, just let me go back and rest. The servants flowed out the room like water and left it in silence, save for the gentle crackling of the fire. It's almost midnight. Odette pointed out. Eat, Bastian commanded, helping himself to his share of the food. I've already had my dinner, Odette said. Really? The servants say otherwise. Are they lying? Bastian said in a sardonic tone. Odette looked at the food on the table. Bread sprinkled with granulated sugar on thick butter, roasted vegetables and pumpkin soup. All was Odette's favorite food and she had to commend Dora for preparing it for her, but her appetite just wasn't there. I suggest you eat now, before I finish my plate, otherwise I will be forced to open your mouth and stuff the food in, Bastian said casually, as if commenting on the weather. Then do it, you always do what you want anyway, so what's the point of doing anything else? Odette said, her voice like ice. The pain returned and along with it, the resentment that had been building over the years. Why the hell did you intervene in Tira's wedding? Odette cried out, tears streaming down her cheeks. You promised to leave her alone. What does the mercy I showed that miserable beggar couple have to do with the promise I made? Bastian held a glass of water just shy of his lips. Since when did you have any concern for my sister? I'm simply repaying the favor. I'm not the kind of person that likes to pass himself off as a freeloader. What about the offer for me to attend the wedding, was that sincere too? What do you think? Bastian laughed casually and leaned back in his chair. Odette looked away, the tears hot in her eyes. She had become much weaker than before and Bastian noticed. Even standing in front of a well-stoked fire, Odette felt cold. The shawl wrapped around her scrawny shoulders felt like a burden, as if she couldn't even bear the weight of the moonlight. She was so pale, She was definitely in no condition to bear a child. If you're going to be so thorough in your calculations, then give me a salary too. Salary? Bastian cocked an eyebrow at Odette. Considering you have been paying me for the last 2 years, it must be compensation for something else, something unrelated to my betrayal, Odette said calmly, clenching her hands together. If Bastian was going to accompany Tira to the wedding, she was going to have to revise her plan. It was going to make things very difficult and she was going to need money. If, by chance, the worst-case scenario was realized, money would be even more critical. Since I am going to be doing more work than before, it's only fair that I receive a proper salary, Odette said, confidence returning to her voice. Bastian wore a difficult expression to read. Was he considering, calculating, or just amused? If I give it to you, do you think you can make it worth it? Yes, absolutely. Odette sat at the table and took up a spoon, suddenly eager to tuck into the soup. Though her stomach churned and twisted at the thought of eating, she thought more on her desire to enjoy the food on the table. The bread had to be soaked in the soup, before it would even go into her mouth. She was able to eat a couple roasted vegetables and a few spoonfuls of soup. When she judged she had eaten enough to avoid the humiliation of being force-fed, Odette lifted her head to look at Bastian. His sunken eyes were intimidating, but on the other hand, she got a sense of satisfaction. She had at least one weapon he could use to fight back. It was the last shred of her dignity. She was not going to let things just happen as he pleased. She was going to make things as hard for him as she could, force him to exert more effort than he intended. In that moment of renewed determination, Bastian got up from the table. Odette closed her eyes, knowing what was to come next. Middle. The fierce kiss started at the dining table and ended when they got to her room. Bastian had passionately locked lips with Odette and wasted no time in removing her clothes. Odette had not resisted, not even a little, as if already deciding to give him what he had paid for. Bastian had to respect her admirable effort. Odette opened her lips again, mixed their tongue, and swallowed it. She endured his pawing at her breasts and clumsy fondling between her legs. She would do anything for money. Overcome with desire, Bastian did not even bother waiting until they were both correctly undressed and entangled himself into Odette, acting like beasts consumed by desire. Bastian became rough with her, biting at her nipples and squeezing her hips hard. It felt like he was trying to break her. Odette gripped the sheets of the bed and did her best to hide her whimpers. Bastian went wild in his thrusting and her skin became incredibly sensitive. She couldn't bear to hold it in anymore. Odette tried to shut out reality, deny the sensations rippling through her, but deep down she knew that something was terribly wrong. She started to get premonitions of a tragedy that was inevitable. She couldn't accept it and did her best to ignore it. Odette glared up at Bastian, who was thrusting wildly. His gaze, as always, was off somewhere in his own mind, barely focused on the air in front of him. He was oblivious to her plight, her endeavors, and she hoped that she could get away before he found out everything. Ah! Odette let out a gasp as Bastian suddenly shifted, grabbing her around the waist and twisting her around to be sat on top of him. She reflexively gripped his chest for balance, digging her nails in. "You have to do some of the work if you want to get paid," Bastian said in a low whisper. Odette was suddenly flush with embarrassment, not sure what she should be doing, so she started bouncing on her knees. Their eyes met momentarily and Odette thought she saw a flash of emotion in Bastian's cold, blue eyes. While she tried to make sense of the emotion she saw, Bastian closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he was as flat and taciturn as before. Their sex nothing more than a means to an end. Grabbing Odette's waist and pulling her down hard on his crotch, she could feel him swell inside her, quickly followed by his climax. Exhausted, Bastian embraced her as she went limp and gasped for breath. He licked her neck and cheek and caressed her back. Odette's body convulsed in response to his unsettling touch, an oddly euphoric sensation overwhelming her. When Bastian reached his limits, he unleashed his primal desire without a second thought. Odette prayed in her mind. "Please trample me more thoroughly. Erase this misfortune I now bear so that I don't have to commit to it. Please." In that moment, Bastian bit and sucked on her flesh and Odette could feel the mix of pain and ecstasy prickle her skin. It was her last memory of the night. Middle. Bastian. Chapter 117, For My Dear Lover. Middle colon middle middle colon middle. Sandrine looked out the window of Franz Clauswitz's studio with interest. Located in a residential area near Boulevard Privé, the street was densely packed with clean, ornate townhouses. The fact that many artists had found their footing here was all thanks to Franz. "The door is open," came the excited shout of Noah. Frowning, Sandrine let the curtains fall back over the window and quietly ascended the stairs to the second floor. Noah stood waiting for her outside the door to the studio that now stood open. Although she found sneaking around someone's house like a thief was reproachful, she couldn't deny the fact that she was also a little excited. "Ah, I knew you could do it," Sandrine said with a smile. When Sandrine had first asked to see Franz's paintings, Noah had flat out refused. Betraying a friend like that was something he wouldn't do. Sandrine knew he would come around eventually. If he truly valued and respected his friends so much, he would never have betrayed and spied in the first place. All it took was a little persuasion with a hefty payout, and Noah soon changed his mind. "Franz won't be returning for a while," he said. He would be busy with some railway business, and the rest of the house went to some party at a college studio across town. Noah took the lead into the studio, and when Sandrine crossed the threshold, she was surprised at how impressive the paintings were. It was impossible to pass them off as products of someone who considered painting a mere hobby. "Seems Franz is a better painter than he is a businessman," Sandrine said. "He does have a fair bit of talent." "Ah, here we are. The painting you want to see is just over here." Sandrine's eyes went wide as Noah brought her attention to a painting partially obscured by a picturesque scene of the city. Odette, Bastian's wife, expressed in details precise enough to leave absolutely no doubt as to who it was. It was a grotesque sight that could not explain the artist's passion for the model. "See? I told you, didn't I?" Noah said with a childish grin. The naked form of Odette gazed out at Sandrine from the painting dreamily. Moonlight glistened off her pale skin, surrounded by a messy bed sheet and a cover that covered nothing. Sandrine burst into laughter. She couldn't help herself. She was thinking about how Bastian was going to react. How much longer is he going to continue to waste his time on such an obscene woman? Her father had advised her to come up with a fallback plan, just in case. It was all right for him. He had his guarantees even if the marriage doesn't work out, so there was nothing to lose for him. That was her father's way, always making decisions that protect his bottom line, but not for her. Sandrine reaffirmed her determination to marry Bastian, even if it meant having to suffer through a second divorce. It didn't matter to her. She would be content with the knowledge that she had finally fully possessed that man. "When is the exhibition opening?" Sandrine asked, lost in thought. "End of the year, at Linger Gallery." "You've rented a pretty nice place." "Well, thanks to Franz, yeah, we poor people would never be able to afford it otherwise." "Well then, shouldn't we repay that kindness?" Sandrine said. She turned to face Noah with a mischievous look on her face, like a child that just came up with the best prank. If Bastian wanted a formidable opponent, then she would become that for him, for her beloved Bastian. She was willing to be anything he wanted, no matter what. Middle colon middle middle colon middle. Odette opened her eyes in time to watch the twilight of dawn play across her bedroom. Still wrapped in the lingering darkness, her room was as tranquil as a world submerged, and the man sat on the end of bed blended with the serene landscape. She changed her mind about getting up and clutched the covers around her tighter, holding her breath. Memories of last night swam through her head, of him towering over her as he came inside, desperate for the inception to take hold, and when the deed was done, he folded her up nice and neatly in the blanket, looking like a carefully packed porcelain doll. Why? Amongst her consideration and doubt, Bastian, who had been looking out across the darkness of the room, rose from the bed. Odette looked at him with tired eyes, as if he held the only answer to all her questions. Even in the gloom of dawn's first light, partially concealed by shadow, Bastian exuded a presence. The harmony of his thick muscles, large frame and rigid form reminded her of the portrayals of ancient warriors in Renaissance paintings. The scars he bore on his body were like desecrations to God's perfect creation. Was that the price of the title hero? While Odette speculated and considered, Bastian grabbed his clothes and left the room without so much as a glance back at him. As his footsteps faded, Odette sat up. The dining table was still laid out from their midnight snacking. Odette sat in her bed, watching the slow encroachment of the morning. Her condition had barely changed from yesterday, even after the consumption of food. In that moment of sadness and solidarity, the door opened to reveal Bastian's return, this time fully dressed in a fresh uniform, like a knight donning his suit of armor before setting out on perilous quests. He closed the door behind him and approached the bed. "I forgot to settle the bill," he said, stopping just a step away from the bed. Odette watched him with a composed expression on her face. Bastian retrieved his wallet from his coat pocket and with a generous smile, produced a thick stack of banknotes and Odette took them. "Thank you," she said calmly. "Accept it." Her mind made the decision. But Odette looked at the money feeling a pang of something in her heart, maybe loss or hesitance, whatever it was, it threatened to engulf her and suffocate her sense of certainty. She forced herself to remain calm, but her cheeks flushed red and betrayed her sense of shame. Bastian looked down at her with a mocking glint in his eyes and tossed the money he had been clutching. The bills fluttered and then scattered onto the bed and the floor. To him, Odette had always been like that, pretending to be flat-out obedient, yet secretly clinging to her frail dignity. It was both pitiful but also admirable. He enjoyed trying to coax that humility out of her. Bastian checked the time and turned to leave. As soon as his back was turned, Odette started picking up the money one by one, leaving no trace behind, diligently collecting the money from the space between the blankets, beneath the slippers, and even under his shadow. Only one small note remained on the tip of his boot. Hesitating for a moment, Odette reached for that last remaining money. As she did so, Bastian sneered as he watched her hunched, bare-backed figure, curled up at his feet, doubled over, hungry eyes counting, like she was some filthy beggar, or dirty courtesan. Isabel's voice rang in his mind, shouting insults at Odette when she had gone wild at the ball in the imperial palace. Although the princess was as incorrigible as she was immature, Bastian had to admit that the princess was better than her. "I will give you some more," Bastian said, trying not to laugh at the sight of Odette, "and the more you work, the more I will give you." Bastian let 4 checks flutter from his hands to the floor. It wasn't difficult for Odette to work out what he meant by increased workload. Feeling a deep sense of shame, Odette silently picked up the checks. They were an amount that was far greater than any salary she had been paid before, and as demeaning as it was, she had no reason not to accept his offer. Bastian left the room without another word, and once the door was closed behind him, Odette got up off the floor. She felt something crumble away in her heart, but she ignored it. Putting the bundle of money away with the rest of her savings, got herself dressed, fixed her disheveled hair and anticipated the knock at the door. "Madam, are you awake?" Molly's voice called softly from the other side of her bedroom door. "Right on time." Bastian. Chapter 118, Red Dream. Middle. "I'm worried about you, you don't look well," Maximin said, unable to hold back his concern anymore. Alma and the dog frolicked in the garden. Odette finally turned to look at him, her face illumined by the sun streaming through the pergola. She almost looked like she glowed. "I'm fine, Sir Sanders, there is no need to worry." "Well, actually, it was the Countess Trier that is concerned about you the most. She asked me to check up on you as she is currently busy with relatives in another city. She regrets not being able to come and visit you in person," Maximin confessed as he lifted a teacup to his lips. "She would also like me to say that if there is anything you need, anything at all, you only need to ask." "Ah, I see," Odette said, turning back to watch Alma play with Marguerite. "Seeing you, though, I can understand why the Countess would be concerned. Have you seen a doctor?" Maximin grew more concerned. "No, it's not necessary. I can introduce you to my family's doctor, he's very good and I can keep it as discreet as you would like." Odette had changed since her husband returned. At first, he thought it might have been the weight of losing her father, but now he was certain it was something else, and the only other thing he could think of was Bastian. "Thank you, but I must decline. There really is no need. I don't want to drop Dr. Kramer's credibility by being examined by another doctor," Odette said politely. "I'm sorry, Odette, I feel I may have misspoken my concern for your health." Maximin's eyes fell to Odette's loose-fitted wedding ring. The awkward silence between them was broken by the infectious laughter of Alma returning. "I'll give this to Mrs. Clauswitz." Alma approached Odette, holding out a bouquet of freshly plucked flowers. "Alma, you mustn't pick other people's flowers without permission," Maximin said. "It's okay, Sir Sanders, really," Odette said. She accepted the flowers with an affectionate smile. "They're so pretty, Alma, just like you." "Flowers are the prettiest, so you should say they are pretty like Mrs. Clauswitz," Alma said, like a teacher to a child. Odette couldn't help but break out into laughter at Alma's mischief. Alma also laughed, not fully understanding the exchange. Even Marguerite barked at the fun. Odette leaned down and kissed Alma on the cheek. The mood was only ruined by the sudden thought that there was only 3 days left. It was overwhelming to even think about it, but she had to leave. What made matters more urgent was the letter Molly had given her from Theodora, who had offered to help her and promised to provide her with money. There was a condition attached to that aid: she had to disappear before winter. It was presented like a generous offer, but Odette could see it for the threat it really was. A desperate measure to protect her son, who was showing an unhealthy obsession with his stepbrother's wife. Money was like poison in this situation. Odette wished to remain resolute in the face of the woman's manipulations. She burned the letter and almost drove Molly off, but that would have been too obvious. She had no intention of joining hands with Theodora, at least, not with the intention to harm Bastian. It was time to leave this rat's nest behind for good. "Will you be heading to Rats now?" Odette asked, politely hinted she wanted to their conversation. "Yes, once I have taken Alma back home, I need to get back to my research. Speaking of which, I should really be heading off soon. Could I ask a favor?" Maximin smiled warmly at her as the words she had pondered over for a while flowed effortlessly from her. "Tell me, Odette. Anything you want. Middle. The pounding crunch of marching soldiers filled the air as Bastian woke up from his short nap. Habitually he looked at his wristwatch. He still had about half an hour until he was needed at a strategy meeting at 2. Bastian got up and went to the kitchen to splash cold water on his face, washing away the sleepy fog still lingering just behind his eyes. Gazing out of the window at the vibrant autumn colors of the water garden, he felt as though he was peering into a hazy scene from a recently awakened dream. Within the dream, he wandered through an expansive field, surrounded by a sea of red. He thought it was blood, but after closer look, it turned out to be a carpet of red flowers. The brilliant, golden sunlight cascaded over the undulating waves of crimson, making it almost blinding. He felt someone approaching from beyond the horizon, but what happened afterward became hazy and indistinct in his memory. Shaking off the meaningless dream, Bastian approached the sink and refreshed his face with a splash of cold water. "You planning on meeting with your father tonight?" A voice came from behind him. Drying his face, Bastian looked over at Eric, who had come in from the next room. He was holding out a cigarette pack to him. Bastian took one and walked out of the kitchen and into the study, lighting the cigarette as he went. He conjured up the metaphorical image of the whole world trying to strangle his father, some even getting close enough to wrap their fingers around his throat. "I hear you went to play tricks on the Count Havald yesterday. Is it really worth the trouble? Franz won't last much longer anyway, once his mother's influence wears off," Eric said, following after Bastian. "It's getting boring," Bastian said, the reply not something Eric was expecting at all. "Well, I guess you have a point. It might be a long while yet until your stepmother kicks the bucket. So, once you settle things, what fun do you have in mind?" "I don't know," Bastian said as he took a deep drag of the cigarette. He did not look very enthusiastic. His indifference did not match the ambitious representation of someone obsessed with success. Bastian was always like that. He would quietly and discreetly dedicate himself to his duty and responsibilities, even though he never seemed to desire anything, but eventually achieved great success. What was even more astounding was that he never seemed to have any regrets or reflections on his success, like he had no idea how many medals and citations he wore on his dress uniform. "You've built yourself quite the company that no one can ignore. You're the youngest admiral in the Navy. Is there anything left for Bastian Clauswitz's ambition, or are you going to go back to trading junk?" Eric was rambling, blurting out words like he would burst if he didn't. He didn't realize his mistake until too late and tensed up, carefully waiting for Bastian's reaction, but Bastian remained as calm as ever. Maybe he was still numbed from sleep. Now that wouldn't be a bad idea. Bastian's overly casual nature made Eric wonder if he was being genuine or not. Just then, the clock in the living room chimed softly to indicate 15 minutes before the hour. "Well, whatever you decides, it's going to be hard to stand up to your father's whims. Good luck with that." Eric left through the front door, waving as he went, and Bastian returned to the study and stood in front of the mirror, checking over his uniform. The man who had killed his wife and abused his children was not worth much of Bastian's time, but a woman that simply stole a few documents was worth all of Bastian's ire. How did that make any sense? "Major Clauswitz," a booming voice echoed down the hallways of Naval HQ. "Admiral Demel." Adjusting his epaulets one last time, Bastian scooped up the documents on the small coffee table and headed into the office where Admiral Demel was waiting for him. While strolling through the passage that linked the two buildings, Bastian recapped the agenda for the impending meeting and briefed Admiral Demel. Amid this, the memory of the vivid red dream resurfaced. Without thinking, he turned his head, and was greeted by a garden bathed in maple hues. The hazy remnants of the dream seemed to blend seamlessly with reality. Lost in these nebulous memories, he was abruptly jolted back to the present as he reached the corridor's terminus. Bastian dispelled these futile musings and stepped into the headquarters. Middle. Sir Xander's car came to a stop on the western side of the Park and Rats, where Odette had requested to be dropped off. Alma was asleep in his arms. Maximin looked over at Odette, who was busy wiping the sweat from her forehead and putting on the wide-brimmed hat that accented her dress quite well, and grabbed her large, heavy bag. "Why don't you tell me exactly where you're going? I can take you straight there." "No, that's okay, it's not too far from here. It would be more inconvenient to take the car all the way, thank you though," Odette said politely and hurried out of the car. Maximin could do nothing but watch the curious woman leave. The driver got back into the car again, but Maximin struggled to tell him to drive on while he could still see Odette walk away. "My lord." When Maximin thought about bringing Odette back, an unexpected shout spread through the air. The driver hurriedly got out of the car and ran toward the sidewalk that bordered the park. Maximin was on the verge of letting out a scream himself, taken aback by the sudden turn of events. Alma, roused from sleep, joined the chorus of surprise with tears streaming down her cheeks. Leaving the crying Alma in the car, Maximin hurriedly sprinted toward Odette lying on the road. Bastian. Chapter 119, Soaring Hawk. Middle. The first thing Odette noticed, when she opened her eyes, was that the ceiling was different. Rather than the usual lace shadows cast by the drapes of her four-poster bed, the ceiling was instead a bland gray. Fortunately, a sigh of a voice muttered from somewhere in the haze of confusion. She recognized the voice, though its tone was different. It still invoked images of a sun-dappled day. "Sir Xanders?" Odette whispered the name through dry lips. She slowly turned her head to see the man sat at the bedside, looking at her with concern. "Ah, you're awake. You collapsed shortly after getting out of the car. We brought you home to recover," Xander said. "Oh, my, really? Thank you," Odette said weakly. It took a lot of effort to get sat up straight. Her body felt like a leaden weight. Maximin handed her a glass of water and went over to adjust the curtains so that the sun didn't shine directly into her face. Drinking the water enthusiastically, Odette felt herself returning to some normality and reflected on her memories for a moment. She had not been feeling well even before Count Xanders came to visit. She shivered and cold sweat ran down her body. Despite everything, she was holding up pretty well, but during the car ride her condition deteriorated quite unexpectedly. Her hunger strike was most likely the cause of her sudden nausea. "I will contact the naval base, see if Major Clauswitz can command." "No, please don't," Odette said sharply. "He's very busy, you see. I don't want to worry my husband over something so small." "I think pregnancy is not something so small, Odette. I'm sure your husband would love to hear the joyous news as soon as possible." "Well, that's what Dr. Zogers confirmed it after he examined you. Though he couldn't be certain without proper examination, he did mention that it was highly probable, which made prescribing anything difficult. He advised that you get seen by a medical examiner as soon as possible." "It can't be true," Odette said, blinking at Maximin. "Take your time, you're still recovering. When my wife was pregnant with Alma, she showed pretty much the same symptoms." "No, I think there might be some kind of misunderstanding, Sir Xanders. I don't think I am pregnant. I know my body better than anyone." Odette asserted her surety without a doubt. "Thank you for your concern and I am ever grateful, but I should be leaving now." Odette got out of the bed in such a rush that she almost immediately fell to the floor. At first, Maximin thought she was trying to retreat under the bed. He rushed around to help her to her feet and could feel her cold, clammy skin through her shaking hand. He led Odette to a chair in front of the open window. When she tried to get up from the chair, he placed a firm hand on her shoulder and held her in place. "If it's something you don't want to talk about, I will respect your wishes. I promise not to interfere, but you must rest here for a little while and then we can leave together." "Sir Xanders, that's the responsible thing to do. Setting out now, in your condition, is dangerous. I will accompany you to your destination, then escort you home." Maximin lowered his posture so that he was eye to eye with Odette. He knew he should call her husband, but she didn't want him involved and he had to respect that. She looked visibly frightened when he mentioned contacting him, but he couldn't just stand aside and let her continue on like this. Odette was about to thank Maximin, when she was cut off by a gentle knock at the door. "Count, it's time," a servant said through the door. "Oh, of course, I have a prior appointment with Alma's headmaster, forgive me, but I must leave. Stay as long as you need. I will be back around 5. Maximin wrapped a blanket over Odette's shoulders before he left Odette in front of the fireplace. He headed for Alma's room, but she was already awake from her nap and running down the corridor. "Daddy, is Mrs. Clauswitz going on a trip? There are lots of pretty clothes and shoes in her bag, I saw them." Alma was bursting with excitement. "You shouldn't be going through other people's things without permission, Alma," Maximin scolded. Alma looked up at him with big, puppy dog eyes. "No, but, the bag fell over and I helped put everything back. I didn't do anything." "What's this?" Maximin noticed something sparkle in Alma's hand. "Little Meg, it fell from the bag and got hurt. I wanted to show Mrs. Clauswitz," Alma said tearfully, holding out her hand. It was a small crystal ornament of a dog that looked a little similar to Marguerite. Middle. The sun had started to set and cast the alley in an ever-deepening shadow. Odette quickened her pace as she noticed the vibrant hues of dusk painting the sky, the anxiety in her heart urging her to increase her pace. Had Sir Xanders returned already? The thought raced through her mind. She knew that Maximin would keep her secret. If he intended to contact Bastian, he would have done it ages ago and she would probably not have had chance to leave. Either way, she wanted to make sure she returned before Maximin did. She didn't want to cause him any more worry. She reached the narrow alleyways, like ant tunnels, and arrived at the pawnshop. Odette gently pushed open the door. The elderly owner, who had been napping in a corner of the store, suddenly awoke as the bell chimed. Placing the bag she had in her hands onto the table, Odette watched as the pawnbroker, donning a pair of old round glasses hanging from his neck, began to inspect the contents without uttering a word. Even from behind her black veil, she sensed his fleeting glance at her. "Are you selling this too?" Holding a brown envelope in his hand, which she didn't recognize, the pawnbroker asked. "No." Odette took it immediately. She had never seen the envelope before and her confusion grew when she noticed the Xanders family crest upon the wax seal, a soaring hawk. Odette walked over to the window and opened the envelope. How shocked she was by the sight of money inside. The handwriting letter was scribbled in haste, as it was not the Count's usual neat, swirling script. "Alma accidentally knocked over your bag and damaged something of yours. Please accept this money for the damaged puppy dog, and my apologize on behalf of my daughter's mistake." Only then did Odette recall the absence of the crystal ornament she had packed, but was curiously absent from the belongings. What was more curious was Xander's behavior and seeming willingness to turn a blind eye to the course of curious events. The large sum of money in the envelope was far more than what the crystal trinket was worth. Sure, she had cherished it, but it was still acquired from a cheap street vendor. The Count must have known that it wasn't worth the amount he put in the envelope. As she burst out from the darkening alley, the postscript made a little more sense to her. "I'm always ready and willing to help you in any way that I can." When the pawnbroker coughed, Odette discreetly stashed the letter and neatly placed the money in her handbag. With tears welling in her eyes and a tight throat suppressing her emotions, Odette returned to the pawn counter. Unfortunately, after quite tough negotiations, she couldn't secure the exact price she aimed for, but it was still acceptable. After giving up all of her belongings, Odette left the pawnshop. The back alley, dimly lit and enshrouded in darkness, gradually came alive with the glow of entertainment lights. Her gaze turned to the brightly illuminated gambling den across the way, and a trace of disgust could be seen in her face. She despised herself for investing her time in the pathetic charade of awaiting this moment. She tarnished everything through her own actions, yet incessantly preached about responsibilities and obligations. She believed her ultimate redemption had arrived, only to now recognize it as nothing but feeble self-satisfaction. Unaware that her illicit desires would drive her to commit even graver wrongs, she hadn't anticipated that abandoning everything and escaping would have prevented this tragedy. The guilt in her faded and she found herself standing in front of a small infirmary in a narrow, dark alley. Despite its inconspicuous appearance and lack of signs, the competence of its physicians could be relied upon. It had been making money, in that exact same spot, for generations. Hesitantly, with Maximin's voice in her head, she stepped forward and the door swung open. From within, a woman with swollen eyes came out, being supported by a friend. You're going to experience a great deal of pain. If you come alone, you'll end up crawling back home because walking won't be an option, warned the woman who was assisting her friend. Meanwhile, the friend being supported could only cry out and scream in pain. "Hey there," a harsh voice called out to Odette. Startled by the sudden greeting, Odette turned to see a man behind the door, gesturing to her. There was dried blood on his apron. It seemed to be a trace left by the woman from earlier. Odette had to suppress the urge to flee, subconsciously massaging her lower abdomen and stepped toward the shabby building. He looked at her thoughtfully. "No trauma. Do you understand what that means?" the man said discreetly. Odette nodded, her thoughts distant. She handed the man the envelope containing the money from Xander's and the pawnshop, taking a more confident step into the infirmary. Bastian. Chapter 120, Wandering. Middle. Of all the places, why did it have to be that room? Odette looked about, her expression vacant. The furniture, decorations and even the view out the window of Shelter River in the Carlsbad cityscape was the same as 2 years ago. Even watching the back of Bastian walking ahead of her was the same. It was as if she had gone back to that autumn time, 2 years ago, and she couldn't shake it from her mind. "Are you comfortable?" the steward asked. He was a little too excited to have such a distinguished guest. "No, everything is fine," Odette said quickly, trying her best to smile. Bastian stood by the window of the suite's drawing room, watching her. "It feels splendid to visit this place again, and to be welcomed. Everything is as splendid as it ever was," Odette said with skillful grace. As the steward withdrew from the room, the staff who had been waiting also turned to leave. In the sudden tranquility, Odette took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. Bastian was still standing there, unchanged, watching her. His expression was hard to read but persistent. Odette opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out, so she turned away from him. She put down Marguerite, who she had been holding, and tidied away her hat and coat. "The Duchess Norma has invited you to have lunch with her," Bastian said, finally breaking the awkward silence just as Odette began unpacking her luggage. Bastian had fulfilled his promise to attend Tira's wedding, but his true purpose for coming to Carlsbad was to prevent influential businessmen from the north interfering with his work. From the second the wedding started on Friday, their schedule was non-stop for 3 days. That Saturday was the hunting party with Duke Erhardt. Bastian would be away all day, and that was the opportunity Odette didn't want to miss. "I thought the hunting party was on Saturday, has it changed to a luncheon?" Odette said, smoothing out the wrinkles of her dress. "Nothing has changed, it's just some gathering the Duchess has arranged. But I already have prior engagements." "I would like to believe that it's not about seeing off your half-sister," Bastian said, pulling out an envelope from his jacket pocket and handing it to Odette. It was the invitation. Although a sense of dread fell upon Odette, she accepted the invitation with resignation. There was still 2 days left, she could find another solution, but for the moment it was important not to arouse suspicion. "Your carriage is waiting, my lord," a servant said as Odette stared at the invitation, her heart thudding in her ears. Odette let out a sigh and looked up at Bastian, who had been quietly watching her. He planted a kiss on her cheek and left. Marguerite, who had been hiding behind a chair, only approached Odette once Bastian left the room and closed the door behind him. "It's all right, Meg," Odette said, taking the murmuring dog into her arms and walked over to the window. Marguerite's petite form emitted a comforting warmth, gradually dispelling the cold that had wrapped around her heart. Odette leaned on the windowsill, watching Bastian's departing car from the hotel's front until another knock on the door brought the news she had been waiting for. "Ma'am, the Becker couple have arrived." Middle. Tira shed tears of joy just as much as tears of sadness for her sister. Nick Becker thoughtfully gave the pair some space, stepping aside and prepared for their imminent parting. Tira continued to laugh and cry and laugh again all afternoon, and not allowing her emotions to settle until well into the afternoon. "I still can't believe I will be getting married here, in such a splendid place, receiving blessings from my sister," Tira said, her face full of emotions. She never imagined that they would be able to spend a night in the finest Carlsbad hotel just before the wedding ceremony. It was all thanks to Bastian. "To think, I hated Major Clauswitz so much, thinking that he had gotten involved with another woman while he was away, but after this, you can really see that he loves you very much." Tira beamed at Odette. Odette held out a box she had been holding under the table. As Tira took it, she burst into tears again. Inside the box were handmade baby clothes, a onesie, vests, socks and a hat. "Oh sister, you really don't have to go through all this trouble just for me. You're my sister, if not you, then who?" Odette said, wiping away Tira's tears and tidying her disheveled hair and blouse collar. "Don't cry, you're a mother now, Tira, you need to be strong." Tira responded with a hug. "You were always like a mother to me, sister, thank you so much. I will do my absolute best to be as good a mother as you were." In the stillness of their hug, Odette's eyes lost their focus. The word mother, the rounded shape of Tira's belly, and the memory of carefully selecting clothes for her niece all stirred up an indescribable sadness and pain. She recalled the dreadful memory of the hospital. Of the dreary waiting room, the ill-lit operating room and the shine of surgical instruments. Tira was the first to pull out of the hug, forcing Odette to bring her mind back to the present. "If I have a girl, I want to name her after you. I have a very strong feeling it's going to be a girl and Nick thinks so too." Tira looked at Odette with a broad grin. Unable to find her voice, Odette simply stared at Tira's swollen belly and forced a smile. "Would you like to touch it? If you're lucky, you might be able to feel the baby moving around." Without waiting for an answer, Tira grabbed Odette's hand and placed it on her belly. "Ah, there, did you feel it?" She moved. "She must know you're her aunt." As Tira laughed, the movement became more pronounced. As Odette felt the baby move, as if it were dancing inside her mother's belly. It was strange and lovely at the same time. "Sister, can we name the baby Charlotte? Would that be okay?" asked Tara. Odette felt herself getting lost in her thoughts again, but a sharp knock at the door forced reality to prevail. Nick opened the door to reveal Tira's old school friend. Seizing her opportunity, Odette excused herself from the Becker's suite and went down to the lobby. She walked aimlessly until she realized she was outside the hotel. Breathing deep into the cool, early evening air, Odette slowly started to feel herself again and continued walking along the river. Middle. "I am truly sorry, my lord," the maid stammered as she bowed her head in embarrassment. She was Odette's maid, but had no clue as to where Odette had gone. The last she had heard, Odette was with her sister. "I will go and look for her," Hans said, stepping forward. "No, let her be," Bastian said as he removed his coat. Hans was taken aback and almost missed his cue to take his master's coat. "She'll be back soon enough," Bastian said with confidence, settling into a chair in front of the fireplace. Having heard that Odette was not with her sister, Bastian quickly checked on the location of Tira and Nick, who were surprisingly enjoying a rather fancy dinner in the hotel's restaurant. Their conversation with Odette was the last anyone had seen her. "Would you like me to delay dinner until the ladies return?" Hans asked. Bastian nodded. As Bastian lit a cigarette, Marguerite made her presence known. Sneaking out of the bedroom, a growl in her throat and came right up behind Bastian's chair. She was baring her teeth, but her tail remained tucked between her legs. Though she had grown considerably from a handful, she was still a small dog. Bastian watched the stupid dog with tired eyes. The dog constantly rolled her eyes to look around the room and continued to growl at nothing in particular. Eventually, she got tired of it and lay on the carpet, her head resting on her front paws. Turning away from the dog's curious behavior, Bastian turned his attention back to the fire and lit his cigarette. Once lit, he turned to look out of the window, where the night sky glittered with a myriad of stars, which quickly resolved themselves to be the sparkling lights of the childish fairground ride Odette seemed so fascinated by. Middle.